Thanks everyone for joining us. This is kind of like a new session on Meet the Author, and it is a really great pleasure for me today to host Christine Armstrong. We haven't known each other for very long, but she's kind of like my friend, I'm her academic wife. So, Jana, I need the stats, I need the data.
Is this true or am I making it up?
Is it a fact? And obviously we weren't friends yet when Christine wrote this book, so but I won't be doing fact-checking, I promise, as well. So basically, I invited Christine today because she's published this amazing book that's called The Mother of All Jobs, something that every academic would like to do, write in a way that Christine does. It's a real page turner, and I'm not a mother, so basically there's a disclaimer there, okay? But it's really I can identify with things and stories that Christine put in this book. I must say that the cover really doesn't do the justice to the book, so don't judge this book by the cover, although I really like the colors.
The cover. I hate it.
But just to tell you who Christine is and why she's so impressive. So Christine is a contributing editor of Management Today, and she's done a trillion different jobs or trillion different activities in her life. So she's very experienced in what she's been doing. And she currently runs a nonprofit women's networking group. She co-founded a communications consultancy, Jericho Chambers, if anyone knows this. She's married. That's a good one. That's quite an achievement these days. With 3 daughters, and is, against her own advice, an active member of the school PTA. And I really like this part. And in that role, she introduced plastic fishing to London's docklands last year in order to start cleaning up the water, and launched a boat made out of 99% recycled plastic. I think that's also another achievement.
To take the kids from schools, we take out primary school children on the water to pull the plastic out, so that before they open the dock gates, the plastic can come out of the water and then go into recycling. And then we take out corporates who pay for the children to go. So it's really nice.
And also, Christine is author of one of the most read pieces in the Sunday Times, with an amazing cover. So you really need to buy this issue. I don't know where you get it in this country,
get it online.
But I'm sure, but don't steal it, right? Okay. Don't download it. And
I can send it to you. Actually, there's a piece of paper with if you put your email address on, I can send you the Sunday Times piece.
Fantastic. So if you want to, and there's also a leaflet, and you can buy this book at the discount price, and I really do strongly recommend it. If you're a mother, you'd enjoy it particularly. If you're a father, you will enjoy it. If you're a grandmother, you will enjoy it. Grandfathers as well, uncles, aunts. Yes. So down to business. This is, as Christine says, a no supermum bullshit book, right? So there's no bullshit in here. It's no pretense. It's actually talking hard business of why it's so difficult to juggle work and parenting, and why it's equally difficult to talk openly about how difficult this is. And basically, to start off, and you're invited to join the conversation at any point, just indicate that you have a question, and I'll give you the floor, because I really want to have this as an interactive session. But to start us off, Christine, why did you write this book?
Okay, so I wrote the book because I couldn't make working parenting work. So I had a really nice job at an advertising agency. I travelled. It was very boring and predictable. I got married. I got pregnant. I went on maternity leave. I thought I would come back to work and everything would be normal. There were senior women in my business, and they just seemed to have come back to work and got on with it, and that's what I thought I would do. And I came back after maternity leave to be met by a new American boss who said, "Gee, Christine, I'm so glad you're back, because what I was thinking was you could do a 3-day week. And instead of doing your job with your team and your office," by the way, I've taken your office, "I thought you could do some PR. In fact, I thought you could do my PR, because I just moved to London." I was like, oh, great. This is all of my career dreams at once. So he and I had quite a difficult conversation. And I called HR and I called lawyers. And essentially he went into what I think we now see as the Saudi Arabia defense, which was initially it didn't happen, everything was fine. Secondly, it was, no, it was my fault, I started it. And thirdly, it was, yes, I'm sure we'll have an investigation, but the outcome is not going to change. Basically, the body's in the well. So my career there was over. So I panicked. My husband had set up his own business while I'd been on maternity leave, which in retrospect wasn't a great decision. And or great time. It was a good decision, but a bad time. And so I panicked and I took another job at a market research agency. And it was a market research agency with a very, very strong hours culture. So everything after 6 o'clock, the analysts would call the second day. So most people ate dinner in the office, most people got taxis home 3, maybe 4 nights a week. And so for me to be trying to leave at 6, which was still not a time where I could get home to see my baby awake, I was leaving at half time. So it was a really difficult environment and I couldn't make it work. So I panicked and thought a lot about what to do about that. And the idea that I came up with was to have another baby. Which didn't help really at all. So I did that, and then I came back and it was worse. So then I thought again and thought maybe the third baby, I have now had the third baby, but I thought, no, that's probably not going to happen. So I went to interview senior women to ask how they were doing it. And I thought they would be able to give me the answers. And I just thought, if I go and talk to them, they can tell me. And then I'd written for management today before. So I'll write down what they say and then I'll tell everyone else. And then we'll all know, right? So I went to meet these women, and they were senior. They were very, very privileged women. They were CEOs, managing directors and law firms, that sort of thing. And I would talk to them, and they would tell me that I had to do this and be well organized and work hard and and I would write it all down. And then I would send them back what they'd said, and then they'd say, actually, could you take out the bit about how my boss is really unsupportive? Can you take out the bit about how my husband is completely unsupportive because actually he's run off with somebody else or whatever? So then I would have to clean it up, and I was like, okay, a bit uncomfortable, but fine. Then they would call and say, could we have lunch? Could we have a drink? Or I would run into them somewhere and they would say, oh, did I not mention that both of my daughters are severely anorexic? Did I not mention that actually my husband and I have been broken up for ages? Did I not mention that I'm saving up all my money every month so that I can leave my job and stop doing all of this because I'm so unhappy? Did I not mention that I drink too much because I'm so wired every day? Did I not mention my health issues around my adrenaline and how hard I'm working and the stress? Did I not mention the breakdown? And suddenly I just had this revelation, well, these are the leaners inners, right? These are the people who have done what Cheryl told them to do. And these are the most privileged leaners inners that there are. So how does this work for everybody else? And so then I went to research the book, which is not those people. The book is people who are in what HR people like to call the pipeline, which I think is a bit horrible. We need another word. But people who are within organizations who may have no intention of being on the board, who may just be doing a job just to get to the end of the month and pay their bills and trying to make it work. And most of them are in that category. And it's to understand their lived experience, because it's not about quotas, it's not about female chief executives, although those things matter. It's about why so many women are not making it through. And that's what the book's about.
For your book, you actually did a lot of kind of like anthropological ethnographic work, right? So basically you talked not only to women, but also to men. Yeah. And Christine also eavesdropped onto conversations. So basically, I really admire this book because basically Christine was allowed to do everything that we as academics are not allowed to do, right? Because we wouldn't ever get the ethics approved.
It's entirely unethical.
Exactly. And then she gets published, right? But
most of it is what people say to me in Asda or at bus stops.
But can you tell me, Christine, who did you talk to? How did you get women open up and men open up to you? And you've told me in the past that basically what people told you, for the record, was completely different or very different to what they were telling you off record over wine and kind of like in a pub.
Yeah. So I started by talking to my friends. So really the contrast was between this kind of like, my friends and I were in the generation where Helena Morrissey and Cheryl, don't tweet Cheryl, I try not to directly have a go at Helena Morrissey, but these women were telling us that everything was fine if we worked hard enough. And I was having all these private conversations where it wasn't working. So I started with that, and that kind of framed the way that I was identifying what some of the issues were. And then I'm a very not academic person, as you've identified, so I use networks. So for instance, my sister-in-law is a fertility coach in Scotland. So I would call her and say, who have you got for me in your network of all these people that you've helped to have babies that this would be relevant for? And I'm particularly looking, who's a single mom, who's got divorced, who's got this kind of a relationship that I'm seeing other people having. And then I've got a friend who's a therapist in South Shields, who's the most well-connected woman in the world. And whenever I call her and say, Sarah, what I need, right, is, and she'll go, okay, I've got 6 different people, and she'll send me a list. I need a dad who's divorced and how it's going for him. I need a couple that's in the midst of a breakthrough, a couple that's got back together. And so essentially I was identifying profiles, and then I would go out to this network of about 15 different women, they were all women, and say, who have you got for me? And then I would kind of sift through those and then talk to those people in person if I could, on the phone if I couldn't. And sometimes they were ongoing conversations over periods of time. And then I would write down what they said, and then I would send it back to them and say, is this what you told me? Are you comfortable with this? And sometimes they would say, oh, I didn't tell you this, but it's relevant. Now I see it. Can I add that in? Great, brilliant. And then I kind of have an ongoing relationship. So there's 12 stories in there, one's mine. So they're based around sort of these 12 kind of case study families, if you like. And then I have an ongoing relationship. I was emailing with one of them this morning. I saw an article that was really relevant to the issue that she had described. So I sent it to her and she said, oh, it's made me cry because it's describing my life. It was a psychoanalyst of somebody. So it is a relationship in a way that I don't think you could have as an academic. And these are very told stories. Sometimes I speak to their husbands as well, if they'll let me, then I'll call sometimes I've interviewed their children, which is amazing. And so you're trying to get a rounded perspective. And also, as you said, talking to teachers or, dentists, maternity nurses or nannies, people who are just involved and say, I've seen this, do you recognize it? What have you seen that's similar? What have you seen that works? What helps?
Christine, you talk to so many different women from across different walks of life with extremely different experiences as well. What would you say is kind of like one thing that really they have in common? What is one shared experience, if you could?
I think the shared experience that I think is the fact that we talked about this and you gave me a really clear frame for it, and I can talk about it much better since we discussed it, but is the fact that we have, in my generation, gone from a male breadwinner model with a kind of expectation of a fixed working pattern to an expectation of dual income families at the same time as we've added the second day that my analysts used to talk about, because so many people are electronically tethered. So instead of one parent working like this, we've now got that parent working like this, and the second parent who would have been at home doing some of this caring also working like this. And nobody's saying that very honestly and saying that doesn't work, okay? That is an absolute recipe for a breakdown, for tears, for marital disharmony, from disconnection from your children. And the shared experience is that everyone thinks it's only them that can't do it. So everyone is in their kitchen going, I'm not trying hard enough. You know what I do? I'll get a slow cooker. I think that might help. I'll get a whiteboard in the kitchen. That might be the answer. Do you know what I'll do? I'll requalify as a teacher. Maybe that's going to fix it. And everybody is trying desperately to figure out why they can't make it work. And that's because I think we're being told such bullshit stories about how if you, like Sheryl Sandberg, have 10, I kid you not, I've interviewed people on Facebook, 10 full-time members of staff running her household, that's somehow applicable to somebody who's earning £24,000 a year, which is the average salary for a woman in the UK, when 2 places at nursery, we don't have good research on it, and Jana and I have talked about this extensively, but to have 2 children in nursery in this country, between the end of maternity and your 33 hours, you need a salary of £40,000 a year. At £60,000 a year, which I think puts you in the top 5% of salaries in the UK, you take home £36 a day if you've got 2 children in nursery. So this doesn't work. Yes?
My question to you is, I will still buy the book.
Yeah. It's fine.
How to have children and a career and stay sane-ish. What do I do?
You have to first accept that what you're experiencing is completely normal and what everybody's experiencing. So you've got to just let all of that angst and I'm not doing enough, let that go. You bought the slow cooker. I know. I know. That is what that is. I mean, you think I joke about this shit. I don't make it up. I know what you fucking did because everybody tried it. It didn't work, did it? No, the kids never eat anything that's ever come out of a slow cooker. Fish fingers, pasta. So I think the first thing is to say is that, okay, so on a sort of big picture is to say, you're not alone, this is completely normal. On a second level, where are the men? Hello, welcome, it's great to have you here. But I cannot tell you how many women's groups I get invited to, and we are not having this conversation at public policy, political level. We are not having this conversation in boardrooms. We are having it in women's groups because it's still women's fucking problem to sort this out. So there's two big picture things. In terms of you specifically, you have to make really, really difficult choices about the path of your career, because trying to do all of those things at once is very demoralizing. And that means putting boundaries around work, probably, and making short-term sacrifices, none of which is going to feel great. I can't tell you can do all of this at the same time and it's going to work, because it probably isn't. It's going to be, can I do a day or two at home? Can I do 3 days? Can I leave at 4 o'clock? What can my partner do if I've got one? Could he do 4 days? How can we sort of balance this out between us and try to make a way through it? Because it will get better. I mean, having two that small and that close is bloody brutal. I watched my best friend do it and nearly killed her. She told me she was 3 months pregnant when the second one was 15, and when I went, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And she said, you're supposed to congratulate me. So it's, and really the stories in there is that there are no silver bullets. There's nothing I can say to you now that's going to go, whoosh, this problem is gone, because you're still going to be knackered. But there's lots of different families that have tried different things. Some have stepped out for a couple of years, some have worked from home, some have worked flexibly, some have battled on and had breakdowns, and some haven't. But it's kind of like you need to read all those stories and go, what can I take? Probably the whiteboard's not going to help either, in case that's your next purchase.
Belgium offers a good example, doesn't
Yeah.
it? So they don't only offer parental leave, they also offer career leave. So it's really not prejudicial one. So you take leave, and it's paid. So basically you can take time off either to be with your kids, to get your, grips with your new life. So I think that's a very good example of how you can do things and open things up, not only to parents, but basically be a more inclusive employer. But in your book you say, while each of these stories explores individual decisions, the big questions are really about the kind of society we want to live in. So what is the society that we actually want to live in? And how is this structured across social class in this country?
So I think I'm not sure that I'm the person to answer the question, what kind of society we want to live in. What I think we've done is inadvertently and almost without noticing, slipped into this new way of working, which is the always on and both parents working, without then putting the social structures around us to make that work, which might include anything from a longer school day to subsidised early years childcare, to maternity pay, which is currently half the rate of minimum wage. So we see lots of families plunging into poverty around the time of birth because of the lack of resources around it. So I think we need to step back and have a really, really good look at that and discuss it. The only party in the UK I can see talking about it at the moment is the Women's Equality Party. I find that extremely depressing. But then when I look at both leadership teams of both of the main parties, I think, who has experienced this? Because this is a book about lived experience, and anyone who's done it gets it. And anybody who hasn't done it, fundamentally doesn't understand. My old chief exec, who's a very enlightened man with 3 children, read the book and said, shit, I didn't know any of this. Really? I mean, this is just eye-opening, Christine. Men should read this book, as if that was a revelation. So unless we're able to elevate this, and if we can get past this sort of narrative from these extremely exceptional women, who I'm not trying to silence in any way, I'm just trying to balance with a broader perspective. In terms of different social classes, I mean, one of the things I did, you talked to me about the care chain and the fact that this longer working day is pushing the burden down the social class structure, so that poor, uneducated, often immigrant women are then looking after our children in appalling conditions. And when the Sunday Times piece came out, a carer from Daventry called me. She works in adult social care, but she used to work in nurseries. And she said when she worked in nurseries 20 years ago, her shift was a 6-hour shift. And she had her kids young. She could operate that with some family support around her family. Her son's girlfriend is 20, is now working in social care. She has a 10-hour shift, because they're trying to compensate for the longer working day and the longer commutes. She gets paid £5.40 an hour, whereas the mother could live on her salary just about. It was type she could live on £5.40 an hour. And there's some other detail in that which is also horrendous. But essentially, we've created this kind of excluded class who then can't afford to have their own children cared for if they then go on to have them or have them. So it is extremely depressing. I'm sorry that it's not more cheerful. I did interview women in their 50s and 60s, and a number of them did voice that and say, do you know what, I used to work really, really hard, and at 5 o'clock I ran out of the office stressed out of my mind, got in my car, careered home to meet the nursery or the nanny or whatever my arrangement was, but when I was home, I was home. No one was expecting me to be doing a conference call with Singapore or editing a document or dealing with my client having a massive tantrum at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, and that's what we're expecting people to do now. And I was put on Women's Hour, and Jane Garvey said, oh God, are we still talking about this? And I said, yeah, we're talking about it because it's getting worse. And they put me up against a woman who was in an older age group who said, well, I just didn't respond to the emails and my career was fine. And I thought, yeah, put you in a law firm now or in a newspaper now or in a consultancy now or any sort of client-facing job. It is not acceptable in those organisations not to respond to your emails after 4 o'clock unless you've got a special arrangement. And if you've got a special arrangement, that will put you on a different career path. And so, but we need to talk about that. And we need to acknowledge it. So thank you for saying, because sometimes I get pushback from people saying, actually, your generation's really, really lucky. And we are lucky in other respects, but that's the kicker, I think. Hello, Claudia.
Could you grab the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. Is that better? Yeah. Taking a cue from one of Stephen's remarks earlier today, and it's a view I fully support. For this to change, I think we need to take it up. Mm-hmm. We need to involve the dominant group. Mm-hmm. What do we mean? Men, mm-hmm. Senior men. Mm-hmm. Are there any stories or people that you encountered who were able to engage with that group, that class successfully? And what did that look like?
I'm sorry, because I feel like I'm being so demoralising, but I did an interview this week, which is for a follow-up to the Sunday Times piece, with a woman who cannot be put on the record, as these people usually can't, who has been a chief executive, is on a board, and she was talking about why she's not honest. So she emailed me after the Sunday Times piece and said, I'm that woman who lies, I go on the panels and say it's fine and you have to work hard, and I've got to tell you it's not true. So I went to see her and I said, we had a long conversation, and I said, what about the men? How are you bringing the men into this conversation? And she said, actually, I think it's getting worse. She's in finance. She said, there is so much backlash here against women, the tokenism, women being favoured, and there's so much resentment among the men, combined with the Me Too movement, and the data shows us that men are now less likely to involve junior female colleagues in lunches and going out after work. She said, so it used to be that the men would go out in a big group and the younger women at least would go with them and were part of the mates thing, even if the older women who had kids or just didn't want to be part of that would go home. Now they don't invite the younger women because people get fired because things happen. And so they say, why would we let them in? This is her quote, why would we let them in if they're going to do this to us? So actually what she's seeing is a closing down. And I said, why don't you talk openly about this? She said, because if there's a woman in my team who works from home one more day, they call it a TTP day, taking the piss day. And they just see it all as special pleading. And she said to then raise the fact that you need extra is just so untenable. You would just be, the insider group is so powerful that, and she has, since she's resigned, she's given up. So I'm not saying that's everywhere. That is in finance, it's in London, it's, but we need to be honest about how difficult it is. And I said, I was pushing her, what would change it, and she was quite demoralised. Now, what the Swedish would say is, we changed the law 40 years ago, 20 years ago, and we're still working through all this stuff, 40 years ago, 74. We changed all this stuff 40 years ago, and we're still working on it, and we still get pockets of resistance, but we're getting there. And I did politics as a degree. I have some academic training somewhere, which, not much. I was mostly at the pub, let's be honest.
But courses now.
And, one of the things I remember clearly is that often the law goes ahead of public opinion, so gay marriage comes in, is legalised before it would get a 50% approval rating. Disability discrimination rules come in before there's widespread acceptance. So I think we do need to push on the legislative side to increase the understanding and the awareness of this issue, and the fact that those insider groups are going to have to deal with it. But they are not coming to it willingly. as far as I can see. Hello.
Holly, we know, okay, I'll roll the mic. I'll be the rolling mic.
As a non-parent in the room, this is still fascinating because I work with a lot of women who have children and who struggle, particularly those who've experienced abuse and therefore are rebuilding their lives, and so additional disadvantages. But I really enjoyed what you were saying about the initial part of the second day. What we see within particularly BME communities is what we call the triple shift.
Yeah.
So you are first and foremost your child primary carer.
Yeah.
Then you are a full-time employee.
Yeah.
And then you come back home and you still have those additional 2 shifts, but then you have the additional shift of supporting your immediate family, the in-laws, the ailing grandma, etc., etc. So huge amount of time poor and having to make those choices. But what I find really fascinating, as a non-parent, but I absolutely understand this, is I never understood this, even as a younger person, this whole parent trap of the ideology. Somebody has a child, they say, oh, you must have them, they're great. And it's this huge big lie, and they make out everything's absolutely fine. The reality is they tell you that because they want to justify their own decision to have those children. But who is it who actually does this? It's other women who are actually encouraging other women, knowing the pain and the suffering and the lack of sleep and the deprivation and feeling like you've been possessed. A lot of right? So I do understand that, but it's the women who are actually perpetuating this. So I get that men also need to be part of this conversation, and that's a huge thing, I think, across all women's groups that I see a lot of lack of, and something that we very much promote, men being part of the solution. But I think women also need to have that honest conversation, and until and unless we get AI to become like sub-parents for our children so we can sleep, we need to rely on humans to raise other humans.
Yeah, I think we do need to talk about it. I mean, my awareness, my sort of take is that these conversations are happening in small social groups all over the world. You know, what I always say about the book is there's nothing you don't know in there. It's all the conversations that you've ever had in a coffee bar, in a wine bar, at your friend's house, but we're not having those conversations publicly. So what I'm trying to do is to elevate that to a public level of consciousness. And somebody emailed me and said, you know, Christine, it's all very interesting, but I'm not sure it's new that women are really busy and stressed. I'm like, no, I get it, but we're not having that conversation. So I think you're right. Although somebody told me earlier today that her husband, they've just had one baby, got so pissed at a wedding recently, he went up to the bride and said, don't have children, it's shit. Which she wasn't sure was a great approach either.
Christine, in your book, you say it's time for a different conversation about working and parenting. And I know that in your recent work, you've kind of progressed from parenting to kind of caring in more general...
Yeah, that's you, Jana. That's you pushing me. Yes, I know.
To more general kind of caring responsibilities. What do you think is that structural issue or barrier that's kind of preventing us to talking openly about the really, kind of real hardship in trying to juggle all those multiple roles and responsibilities we have?
So I think there's a couple of things going on. So the people we hear about, we like success stories, don't we? So we hear from women who are very successful. And as you said, they are often more senior in organisations, which mean they may have had a different experience. It may have been by the time they had children that they already could afford very good childcare. It may be that they've got a very supportive partner. But whatever, they've got a set of circumstances that means that it works for them. And so they tend to talk about that set of circumstances. And the people who are in it, like you, I'm going to guess you don't have a heck of a lot of time to make a speech, write a book, start a movement around this. You're just buggering on, just getting through each day. So there's a whole silent sort of group that is too busy and too knackered, frankly, and also in the middle of their organisations. And if I said to you, OK, let's put your name and your business on a big piece about how hard this is, you're going to go, sure this is going to be great for my career. Not sure my employer is much going to appreciate me saying how actually this doesn't work. So I can't get people to talk to me on the record. I mean, I tried because the Sunday Times was like, can we do a big on the record piece? So I do all these interviews and I send the Sunday Times the response. They're like, there's nothing there. I'm like, yeah, because all of their names and employers are on it. Their boss is going to read it. Their colleagues are going to read it. Their husband is going to read it. There's only so much that they can say, and it's very sanitized. That's why everything is concealed in this, and it's why everything will be concealed in the next piece. Because there's one woman who I asked to say it, I said, why can't you talk about it? She said, do you want me to admit that I'm a really shit and distracted and overwhelmed mother, or that I'm not actually competent to do my job right now because I'm I'm so tired. Which of those is a good thing for me to say publicly? And you're like, yeah, that's a shit call. So it's hard to talk about.
You had a question, Catherine.
Thank you. So this sort of, well, I've been able to come back flexibly, do 3 days a week. The company have been very accommodating. They've made it possible for me to do this, and I really appreciate it, and so on. So I'm stepping down for a while, and as my baby gets older, it will be much easier, and then I'll be able to get back on the career ladder. But what sort of seems to be there really is that it's not so easy to get back on the career ladder when the child gets older, that other people overtake them, that they miss the opportunities. And I just wondered if you had any sorts of thoughts on that. Really.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think two different things happen. One is that people kind of adjust to that 3 days a week. They make it work financially and they adjust their expectations, and they go, actually, what I've realised is I do want to be at the school gate, and I'm now involved in my community, and so I don't want to go back to 5 days, and I don't care as much about it as I did before I had children. Or if they're ambitious and they try to get back in, they feel pushed out, and then it's much more difficult because they have changed categories, and they may have to change organisations to be seen differently. And certainly I've interviewed women who said, I'd been sort of branded as this, and in order to change that profile, the only thing that I could do was to move organisation. The other thing, of course, which you get is women with teenagers who say, I wish I'd taken my maternity, saved all my maternity leave and had taken it later because my teenagers are so bloody demanding. And so you sort of have this two sort of peaks of parenting where you've got the early years, which are bonkers, and then you can have people who find teenagers very demanding and want to take more time out then. So they might go back in for a while and then come out again later and then go back in again. But our career progression, as has been discussed today, our career progression, the way we write CVs, all of that is not supportive of that. And that would be one of the things you would want to look at if you thought about these things seriously. If the government could think about anything other than Brexit, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know if I've ever enjoyed a full academic hour to such an extent as I have this one. Thank you so very much for writing this book, also for being on a mission of kind of transforming the British society and kind of talking openly about the hustle and bustle of being a parent and being a working parent. I think everyone in the room appreciates it. Christine is also kind enough to give us a leaflet with a discount, so you'll get it at a discount price, and it's quite affordable, and I do recommend it. If not for yourself, then someone else. Claudia, you had a...
I do. I have a request. Let's keep talking.
Could you grab the mic?
I have a request to the people in the room. Let's keep talking about this, please. Let's not decide that not having children is the answer to the problem.
And do put your details on the piece of paper, and then I can email you with the Sunday Times piece and some other bits of data and things that may also be useful.
And on that note, thanks everyone for attending this session, and thank you, Christine.
Pleasure.